calculate value over a 5-minute call, 50, 60 calls without getting a single conversion. Leave my ego at the door, learn as much as possible. I wanted to be able to be independent and understand.
What was it about tech sales that attracted you?
Increasing opportunity. Sales is a really good challenge that I could push myself in. I felt sales was the industry that could provide me with.
Tex Smouha-Ho is an account executive at ShipIt, a leading commerce delivery platform, breaking down everything about becoming a better salesperson and the resilience needed to transition from fields like sports marketing to sales tech.
If you had a chance of going back, what would you do differently?
I wouldn't actually change a thing. All the experiences I had in the past allowed me to become an AE, talking to truck drivers and giving them quotations. A lot of SDRs tend to fail because they...
Well, mate, thanks for coming down and joining and participating and being in the limelight on the casted couch. Appreciate it. So I want to really just try to extract a few little nuggets and bullet points around, life in the life of a tech sales person like yourself that's going to come out of uni, got into tech sales, started as a BDR, SDR, progressed into that as your career. But I guess tell me a bit about how you mentioned that you had a story of how you got into sales initially. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, first off. But if I was to talk about my path into tech sales, I actually started in a Bachelor of Business in Sports Marketing, or Sports Management, excuse me. And with that, it was more around, I had an interest in sports and not really focused on the technical or the tech side of business. However, as I matured and growed and I had my education at Torrens University and I actually interned at the Sydney Roosters, which I thought was a really interesting and insightful way of understanding investors and what they're looking for in terms of industry. However, I felt that it wasn't really aligned with my characteristics or strengths, and that's where I moved over to account management at a heavy haulage business called Loadshift. And with that, I suppose that gives you definitely some good scarring where you're talking to truck drivers and giving them quotations. And working in that industry definitely has its challenges where you're calling over 60 times a day. And from there, it allowed me to build that muscle. However, I felt there was a limited gap in terms of my development with my skill set. And that's where I made the approach into software sales, where I was working in a SaaS business called ShipIt. And that allowed me to, I feel, align with my goals, but also my characteristics, and then building up resilience allowed me to flourish in a really rewarding industry.
I'm intrigued when you say, better aligned going into tech sales. Just from a raw perspective, what was it about tech sales that attracted you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've always heard, not only through just educating myself through LinkedIn, but also YouTube and the high growth market of say Facebook and all those and the Metas of the worlds, and then all these increasing opportunity that lied there. And I've only heard great things about the tech industry.
What have you heard?
Well, the high growth opportunity, there's multiple different brands and businesses, whether it be from an SMB, mid-market or enterprise. There's always I feel an area which I could apply myself in. And that's where I felt I would throw myself in the deep end and get into tech sales and really challenge myself.
So was it the career growth and challenging yourself and stretching yourself and that personal development, was that the core driver for getting into tech sales?
Yeah, well, I always found I really wanted to push myself as I continued to mature from my teenage years into my 20s. And I felt sales is a really good challenge that I could push myself in.
Yeah.
And trying to leave my ego at the door and learn as much as possible. I wanted to be able to be independent and understand communication and bring value to a business. I felt sales was the industry that could provide me with that in a really rapid rate.
Mm. What are your core motivations and drivers?
In terms of core motivations and drivers, I feel that I suppose I've had great role models in my family. I'd say my brother was a really good role model where I saw his development and independence and allowed him to flourish and have a great life. And I really wanted to mold myself after him too, where I could really challenge myself in an industry that was extremely rewarding, but also allow me to develop as an individual, and then also bringing a lot of value to a business where I could not only have materialistic great outcomes for myself, but also allow myself to become a better human.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting because I was money motivated when I was
Yeah.
younger, and I I grew up in a with my family, and we had a good upbringing, but also I was very much set the expectation that you got to earn. If you want to buy something, you got to go out there and earn it. And I would always work very hard to make money to go and buy nice things. And what I realized is that I wasn't necessarily motivated by money. I was actually motivated by what money gave me, which was the lifestyle and the the trips away. I bought my first motorbike, my car, that sort of thing. And I found that sales is when you're on a commission only plan, you can really transform your life because it's uncapped.
Yeah.
There's a correlation between input and output for both sides as well. So you got into tech sales, and often the starting block for juniors coming from either university or out of industry is the BDR or SDR role, which is heavily outbound, and it's the I say the toughest role in sales. It's pretty ruthless, pretty tough. Talk to me a little bit about what a day in the life of a BDR at ShipIt look like, and how did you stay motivated and achieve?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when I got approached by ShipIt, I was actually hired as the first BDR at the business. So I really had to learn on the fly about what how to articulate value over a 5-minute call. And it can be definitely challenging in terms of industry when you're completely new to sales. However, I had that, scarring, so to speak, in my previous industry that I worked with. So it allowed me to be comfortable making 50, 60 calls without getting a single conversion. But it also allowed me to learn on the fly and apply my learnings and resonate value in a very short period over a call. And I always found that if I was able to articulate value and resonate with the consumer over a phone call in the first 30 seconds, I could build that buyer intent. And then it also allowed me to better prepare my account executives. And then they could provide me with really constructive feedback. And it always allowed me to learn on the fly too.
Yeah, nice. And coming into a BDR role, it's a stepping stone, and it's an opportunity to develop your skill sets, earn your stripes, and learn an industry. What was your vision for where you would end up landing once you'd been in that role as a BDR?
Yeah, well, I always found it quite lucrative or attractive, the AE process. I thought it was really a good challenge to push myself. And I found the biggest challenge or hurdle in sales was actually getting to that AE role. And once you get there, it's an awesome achievement by no means. However, I found it was really insightful learning how different businesses function, and especially at ShipIt, you're working in pet industries to fashion and retail to big and bulky retailers. So you actually get to learn a lot of different industries and educate yourself around how you can bring value to their business.
What was as an SDR or BDR, what was your monthly or quarterly sales target?
It was actually pretty high to begin with. So as a BDR, I worked in not only SMB, but targeting medium-sized businesses and also enterprise. So the target, I believe, back in the day was 65 bookings a month, which was pretty hefty. However, if you booked, say, a mid-market or enterprise account, that counts as 2. So you're incentivized to go for those bigger fishes in market, and it allowed me to be very successful in the role.
What do you put your success down to?
If I was to put my success down to 3 common denominators as an SDR, I think resilience, also curiosity and looking to learn more, but also allowing myself to leave my ego at the door and learn as much as possible and learn about different industries and apply my learnings as much as possible. I find that a lot of SDRs tend to fail because they carry their ego as they continue to climb the tree in terms of sales, and it can have some side effects, so to speak, when it comes to moving up to the AE chain and blocking you from progressing.
It's a little bit of a gamble for both sides to jump into the role of an SDR. If you haven't done it before, the thought of jumping on the phones and a lot of cold calling and rejection is, you don't know how you're going to face that until you're in the coal fire. And then with regards to the hiring teams, there's a risk. Is this going to work out? Is it not going to work out? So when you look at candidates that have not been successful in the roles, are there any trends that you've seen that they have or haven't done that have put them in a position to not be successful?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, typically I can only go off what I know, and I had a very regimented routine. I kept myself accountable, so I don't even start with like how their skill set and how they apply themselves. I actually just ask them what they do in their day-to-day life and how they tend to function. And I'm a firm believer that someone that's accountable and also keen to learn are two main characteristics, but also having resiliency is some key intangibles that can really make you flourish in the SDR role. And yeah.
I want to ask about like, activity and work ethic, because there's a correlation between input and output. What does activity look like from an SDR perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had a pretty scheduled routine as an SDR where typically at the start of the beginning of the week, Monday, people aren't really calling merchants, because merchants are obviously getting the ducks in a row over the weekend. There's a fair bit of admin they need to get their head across. So it was actually around prospecting, scheduling emails, but also ensuring that I had enough leads to do some outreach for not only Monday afternoon, but also Tuesday. So every single day I had a pretty regimented routine, and it allowed myself to not burn through all my leads at once, but also allowed me to do appropriate outreach to hit my quota.
And so you've transitioned successfully into an account executive role where you're working full sales cycle. So you probably do some of your own outreach still, but you get leads from the SDR and marketing team and you work it from beginning to end. What was that journey like from crossing from, the first part, the booking of the appointment, to actually, having a dance with them and taking them from beginning to end?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I find as an SDR, you're used to that, say, short dopamine hit where you can continually getting bookings and it's a great feeling. With being an AE, it's much more of a slow burn where you need to work through a rigorous sales cycle, but also build intent and making sure you're resonating and listening to their values and needs, but making sure that they're actually not going from this is a great product, I understand what it is, to I really need this product. And understanding its features and values and how it can be applied to their own business. So articulating value is differentiated from an AE to a BDR, where BDR, you're trying to articulate value in 5 minutes to get enough buyer intent so they actually sit in the call, whilst this is trying to get intent from them to bring in their wider stakeholder group and orchestrating accordingly to allow them to get enough buyer intent to have a solid solution in front of them.
What does a day in the life of an account executive look like? And or even a week, like in terms of what percentage of your time is on prospecting? How many meetings do you do a week? How many deals are you closing on a monthly or quarterly basis?
Yeah. Well, typically it'll be 2 to 3 meetings a week roughly, and they tend to stand for an hour each. However, that's mainly in the demo cycle when you're first speaking to them or in the...
2 to 3, did you say?
2 to 3. Typically it can be a bit shorter depending on the time of the year, like Black Friday right now. However, from there also there's solutioning calls that you need to schedule, but also allow you enough time to adequately prospect and learn about their differentiated needs and orchestrating the right people within the business to apply the product's best values to what they're after. So it's a lot of different areas within the business that you need to orchestrate, and it can be a bit hairy at times, but say from Monday to Friday, you're doing your outreach, but also doing your meeting and preparation, but then also working behind the scenes to understand that can our product deliver on their needs.
How many companies would you have in a pipeline at any one time?
Typically about 10 to 15 in that range.
Yeah.
And usually deals that would come across maybe 3 to 5 in that window would get signed over a quarter. So it's, I would say, a fairly lean amount of leads or accounts that you're working through.
And when you look at metrics and performance of things like call, revenue, pipeline, are there any any metrics or ratios that you like to work towards in terms of making sure that your book of accounts is in healthy order?
Yeah, I go by the rule that my manager set for us as a team, where 3.5 times pipeline is usually the money, like the money number to allow you to not burn through leads essentially, but allow you to have enough in pipeline that if there's always going to be a deal that doesn't come through, and ensuring that you've got always a security blanket where you can get enough deals that you're hitting your quota as projected.
It sounds like you've had a great start to your career for the last 4 years or so. If you had a chance of going back 2 years and changing 1, 2, 3 things to fast track and actually accelerate where you are today from whether it's a development and earnings perspective, what would you do differently?
To be honest, I wouldn't actually change a thing. I thought all the experiences I had in the past allowed me to become an AE at this time frame, which I still think was quite a shortened path to typically a BDR or SDR.
How long were you an SDR for?
15 months.
15, okay.
So I worked as an SDR as a junior one for 9 months before being pushed up to senior. So I knew it was always there. And I feel that cold calling hit me quite quickly, where I had the characteristics to be quite successful. And building that scarring allowed me to apply my learnings really efficiently.
Yeah, that's a great response. And I often think that people coming into this role, it's tough. They go, I want to just do cold calling for 3 months and then be a full quota carrier. That would be nice. I also don't think that you've done yourself the right service in terms of building that muscle memory and capability. Just in terms of tips and recommendations, and when it comes to self-development, self-improvement, etc., what do you do to invest in your own development and capability from a education perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one thing I've done always is listen to my own recordings and take notes down to understand where there was an opportunity to, say, probe another question, but also a learning of where I was, say, missing in terms of my response and articulating value. So from a self-review point of view, I'm always analysing where I can be better, but then also learning from my peers and understanding their perspectives so I can have a bit of a different approach, but also listening to podcasts and reading books to understand different approaches to being to sales. And
what's your favourite podcast and book?
Oh, putting me on the spot. In terms of a podcast, I love to listen to Chris Williamson. He always has different perspectives and different characters on the platform. And not to sound like a sales cliche, but I say Alex Hormozy is also a really interesting individual that really pushes he's extremely ambitious. And I try and be as ambitious, not as ambitious because he's out of this world, but try and push myself as much as possible.
Yeah, awesome. And books?
And books, sales EQ. So I feel it was very valuable as say an SDR or a BDR, but also an AE, where you're understanding their characteristics and the main traits when you're speaking to a persona, and then understanding how you can drive a conversation and maintain the drivers for that to ensure that you're in control through the whole sales cycle, but also through outreach too, and making sure that you're articulating value in a very short period of time as an SDR.
And any tips for people similar to yourself looking at a career in tech sales? Any recommendations or best practices you'd share? Going
to a business that there's room to grow, I always found that ShipIt provided me with that opportunity. So allowing you to fail and learn from those failures is something that I really valued. I feel that I learn specifically from that. So my guidance would be to be able to join an industry that allows you to learn. I like to say fail, then apply those learnings. And that can be from an SMB, mid-market opportunity. And I feel that tech sales really provides that.
Amazing. Tex, thank you so much for joining us. That was really insightful.
No, I appreciate you. Thank you for having me, James.